Some cases are simply too strange to ignore. The stories in this list feature some of the most mysterious disappearances of recent decades, bizarre, chilling cases that continue to defy explanation. The case of Martin Allen. In the heart of London, during the evening rush hour, a 15-year-old boy vanished without a trace. There were no screams, no bystanders reacted, only a school backpack left behind, and questions that, decades later, remain unanswered. That teenager was Martin Allen, and his disappearance would later uncover disturbing links to powerful figures, alleged child abuse networks, and a systemic cover-up that has withstood the test of time. Born on October 28, 1964, nothing in Martin's early life suggested it would end in one of Britain's darkest and most enduring mysteries. He was raised in a modest, middle-class family, comfortable, but far from wealthy. His father, Tom Allen, was a serious and meticulous man. A veteran of the British Army, after years of service, he worked as a professional driver. His reliability and discretion earned him a rare role, personal chauffeur to the Australian High Commissioner in London. His mother, Eileen Allen, devoted herself to the family and worked part-time as an administrative assistant in a local school. They were attentive, loving, and disciplined parents. The Allens had 3 sons: Kevin, the eldest, Bob, the middle child, and Martin, the youngest. Over the years, the family built a relatively stable life, though not without sacrifices. Tom's job with the Australian delegation required professionalism, discretion, and full-time availability. In return, they were offered a residence in one of London's most prestigious neighborhoods, Hyde Park Gate. This diplomatic property, secured and elegant, was surrounded by embassies. Living there was a privilege, but also meant being in close proximity to power, and, as would later emerge, to its darkest corners. Martin was a quiet, respectful, and studious teenager. At 15, he was about 1.50 meters tall, slim, with fair skin and light brown hair, always neatly combed. He wore his school uniform daily: navy jacket, white shirt, tie, and gray trousers. He attended the Central Foundation School on Cowper Street near Old Street in central London. Every morning, he took the underground to school and returned by the same route. He knew the city well and followed a strict routine. He wasn't careless or impulsive, and had no history of conflict with anyone. The morning of Monday, November 5, 1979, unfolded like any other. Tom dropped him off at the station, and Martin went to school. It was a special day, bonfire night, commemorating Guy Fawkes' failed plot against Parliament. Across the country, there were fireworks, parades, and school events. Many teenagers took the opportunity to meet up with friends or stay out late in parks and public squares. But Martin had different plans. As usual, he intended to go home first. He had promised his brother Bob he would drop off some money at his flat on Holloway Road, in the north of the city, and then return to Hyde Park. He left school shortly before 4 p.m., carrying his distinctive blue backpack with reflective details. He boarded the Underground headed for King's Cross, one of the busiest stations in London at that time, right at the start of rush hour. The platforms were packed. It's known that Martin was there. Several classmates saw him, and a few workers confirmed his presence. He boarded a train on the Piccadilly line. Then, everything vanished into a haze. That was the last confirmed sighting of Martin Allen. What followed was a scattered trail of disconnected testimonies, overlooked details, and a series of investigative errors that would stretch across decades. His mother, Eileen, began to worry early on. By 5:30 p.m., Martin still hadn't returned. She called Bob, who confirmed that Martin had never made it to his flat either. This was unusual. Martin wasn't the kind of boy to be late without notice. At 6:00, they called his friends. At 7:00, they contacted the school. By 9:00 p.m., they filed a formal missing person report at the local police station. To them, it was already clear something was wrong. The police, however, as was common in those years, initially treated the case as a standard teenage disappearance, likely a runaway. Perhaps he'd been distracted by the celebrations. Nothing indicated immediate danger, but that assumption would prove gravely mistaken. The next day, reports began to emerge that would change everything. A woman who had been traveling on the same metro line that Monday. The witness reported seeing a boy who matched Martin Allen's description exactly, but he was not alone. He was accompanied by an adult man, estimated to be between 30 and 40 years old. The man was of medium build, with light-colored hair and a thick mustache. He wore a dark jacket and jeans. They appeared to be together, but something about their interaction struck the witness as odd. The man kept his arm around the boy's neck, not in a protective or affectionate manner, but as a subtle yet firm form of physical control. The witness saw them disembark together at Gloucester Road Station. There, she recalled, the boy appeared to try and pull away, but the man gently pushed him and whispered something in his ear. The boy didn't respond. His face looked blank, as if he were subdued or intimidated. Moments later, another witness reported seeing the same man and boy at Earl's Court Station. This time, they boarded another train. Again, the man placed his arm around the boy's neck and whispered, "Do what I told you, and everything will be fine." It was a fleeting scene, one of countless interactions that take place in the London Underground daily. No one intervened, no one reported anything, until the boy's disappearance made headlines. Once the police received these witness statements, the nature of the case shifted dramatically. It was no longer seen as a possible runaway, but a likely abduction. A composite sketch of the suspect was created. Officers were stationed at key underground stops, and authorities began combing through whatever security footage was available. But in 1979, surveillance cameras in the London Underground were scarce and low in quality. Nothing useful emerged. Then came an even more unsettling discovery. At Embankment Station, maintenance staff opened a ticket booth that had not been used in several days. Inside, they found Martin's school backpack. It was intact, no signs of damage, no blood, nothing missing. It was as if someone had deliberately placed it there, calmly, with no concern about it being discovered. The find reinforced the abduction theory, but it also raised deeply troubling questions. Why leave the backpack in a station that wasn't part of his regular route? Was it a diversion or a calculated message? A demonstration of control? The contents of the backpack revealed nothing useful. Some school supplies. A notebook, a textbook. There were no fingerprints, no notes, no clues pointing to the kidnapper. Yet the mere presence of the backpack, perfectly preserved in such an unexpected location, sent a chilling message to the investigators. It suggested the abductor had acted quickly, and with intimate knowledge of the city. This was no spontaneous crime. The placement of the bag seemed almost symbolic. They didn't want the contents, they wanted the boy. As days passed and public pressure mounted, the Metropolitan Police launched a massive search operation. Over 40 homes across the Greater London area were searched. Hundreds of people were interviewed. Records were examined. Tunnels, depots, trains, even parks and rivers were combed for any trace of Martin. The Allen family plastered the city with posters. Martin's serious face, his large brown eyes, and school uniform became a familiar image in newspapers, on television, and across bus stops. But there were no solid leads. No one came forward with meaningful information. The composite sketch of the man seen with Martin was circulated widely, but no positive identification was ever made. As the investigation stalled, the Allen family endured a living nightmare. Tom Allen continued working for the Australian High Commissioner, but his daily routine was burdened by a growing weight. Each day he returned home without answers added to his quiet despair. Eileen, his wife, began to suffer serious health issues from the stress. She slept with the lights on, left the window open in case Martin returned, and lit a candle in the dining room every night. Kevin, the eldest son, became increasingly involved in the case. He transformed into a kind of amateur investigator, visiting police stations, requesting files, speaking with reporters. The more he uncovered, the more questions emerged. One question lingered persistently: the family's environment. Hyde Park Gate was a diplomatic zone. The Allens lived in a government-owned property, under surveillance. If Martin had been followed, or if someone had tried to take him by force near their home, it would likely have been noticed. Kevin began to suspect that the crime hadn't been random. Perhaps someone knew exactly who Martin was, where he lived, and how he moved through the city. They had waited for the precise moment to strike. His suspicions were later reinforced by something even more disturbing: warnings. Years later, Kevin revealed that both he and his parents had received subtle threats and veiled messages from people who claimed to be assisting in the investigation. On more than one occasion, a police officer reportedly told them that stirring the waters could be dangerous, that powerful individuals had an interest in keeping the case from progressing. The Allen family wasn't naive. They were fully aware they lived among diplomats, intelligence agents, and government operatives, and they understood that some secrets carry more weight than silence itself. Throughout the 1980s, the case gradually grew cold. Though the police officially kept the file open, there were no breakthroughs. Occasionally, rumors sparked brief public interest. A boy spotted in northern England, a teenager resembling Martin, an anonymous tip about child exploitation networks, but all led to dead ends. By 1991, more than a decade after Martin vanished, the case was reclassified as a cold case. No evidence, no body, no suspect ever arrested. It was as if Martin had been swallowed by the city and erased from its memory. But in the 1990s, something began to emerge, something that would cast an even darker shadow over the mystery. Reports of organized pedophile rings in the United Kingdom began to intensify. Allegations surfaced involving foster homes, orphanages, and exclusive private clubs where children were allegedly taken to be abused. For years, the majority of these claims were ignored by the authorities. But when some investigations began to implicate political figures and members of parliament, the matter escalated dramatically. One name that appeared repeatedly was Sidney Cook, convicted of the murder of teenager Jason Swift. Cook was part of a group of men who arranged gatherings specifically to sexually assault minors. Several of his former accomplices later claimed that the abuse often ended in murder. Victims' bodies, they alleged, were buried in abandoned lots, derelict factories, or incinerated. One such associate, interviewed anonymously in prison, made a statement that deeply unsettled those who heard it. "That boy they took from the underground, the one in the school uniform, we had him for a whole day. Then he was gone." The description did not explicitly name Martin Allen, but the details were far too specific to dismiss. The school uniform, the boy's age, and the abduction location all matched. The police attempted to question Cook again, but he provided no useful information. His only reply was, "I've done many things I don't remember. If we had him, well, you know what happened." In 1998, Kevin Allen formally demanded the case be reopened. Shortly afterward, police conducted a raid on a house in Liverpool. Inside a sealed room, they found what appeared to be a shrine. There were newspaper clippings featuring Martin's face, candles, children's drawings, school supplies, and even a makeshift gravestone bearing his name. The discovery was deeply disturbing. However, the homeowner was never formally linked to Martin's abduction, and once again, the absence of direct evidence frustrated any legal proceedings. In the years that followed, several special operations were launched to re-examine historical cases of child abuse. One investigation focused on Elm Guest House, a boarding home located in the Barnes district, where private parties with underage victims were allegedly held. Former employees claimed they had seen Martin Allen there, in the company of an older man. Yet those testimonies never made it to court. They were deemed either insufficient or unverifiable. Meanwhile, the Allen family had long stopped hoping for justice. They now only wished to know the truth. In a televised interview in the early 2000s, Tom Allen, his voice frail with emotion, said, "I don't care if someone goes to prison. I don't care if it's too late. I just want to know." Did my son suffer? Is he dead? Where is he? His wife, Eileen, seated beside him, clutched one of the few remaining photographs of Martin, taken at home just before his 14th birthday. In it, he stands with a shy expression, his smile faint and timid, the same image that had appeared on missing posters across the country. In 2006, the police announced the case would be reopened, not due to new evidence, but because of mounting public pressure. By that time, the idea of systemic cover-ups in child abuse cases was no longer considered a fringe theory. The United Kingdom had begun to confront its own disturbing past, and Martin Allen's name once again returned to the headlines. The newly assigned investigative team encountered a bleak reality. Many key witnesses had passed away, others refused to speak, and worst of all, a substantial portion of the original case file had vanished. In 2009, the Allen family was informed that many of the documents related to Martin's disappearance had been either damaged or destroyed in a flood that had affected police archives. Kevin Allen reacted with disbelief. He demanded proof, detailed reports, logs, any record of the incident. He received none. From that point on, Kevin's approach changed. He stopped requesting assistance and began issuing direct accusations. According to him, someone within British institutions was deliberately intervening to erase all traces of his brother's case. And it wasn't incompetence, it was intentional obstruction. In 2012, amid a wave of new allegations against public figures, such as Jimmy Savile and other former BBC presenters, the media once again turned its attention to historical abuse cases. It was in this context that Operation Fairbank was launched, a police initiative to investigate alleged abuse networks with potential political connections. Under its umbrella came a more focused investigation, Operation Midland, an inquiry that would reshape the national conversation, though not necessarily for the better. In 2014, a man named Carl Beach, who used the pseudonym Nick, came forward. He claimed to have been the victim of a high-level pedophile ring run by senior political figures. A former member of the British military claimed he had attended secret gatherings since childhood, and that during one such meeting, he had witnessed the murder of 3 boys. One of the names he mentioned, he said, was Martin Allen. His words caused an uproar. Carl Beach didn't just mention Martin. He directly implicated high-profile individuals, former members of parliament, senior military officials, even people close to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. His testimony was taken seriously for months. The Allen case once again made front-page news. A new team of officers was assigned. A new composite sketch of the man seen at Gloucester Road was released, and authorities promised transparency. But in 2016, it all collapsed. Carl Beach was exposed as a fraud. Investigators discovered he had fabricated evidence, invented details, and lied under oath. He was tried and convicted of perverting the course of justice. His lies didn't just destroy his own credibility. They also discredited the investigations that had gained momentum as a result of his claims. For the Allen family, it was a profound betrayal. In later interviews, Kevin Allen admitted that Beach had likely fabricated parts of his story, but he still believed some of Beach's statements contained truths that no one else had dared to reveal. Despite the fallout, the police kept the case open. In 2017, Operation Midland was officially closed, but a new investigation was launched, Operation Mousewit, focused solely on the Martin Allen case. Officers interviewed inmates connected to Sidney Cook. One prisoner claimed the boy from the underground, the one in the school uniform, had been taken to a house in East London and hadn't survived the night. But no physical evidence was ever found. No names, no address, no conclusive proof. In parallel, Kevin Allen continued his personal investigation. Using his own funds, he hired private investigators, combed through every available digital record, and visited abandoned properties mentioned in anonymous tips. In an interview with 60 Minutes Australia, he claimed that his family had been warned not to speak publicly, and that classified government files sealed under national security protections included his brother's name, files allegedly connecting Martin to untouchable individuals. To this day, there is no body. No living eyewitnesses, no confirmed suspect, only a long, fragmented trail of testimonies, missing documents, and a family determined not to let Martin Allen's name fade into obscurity. Police insist the case remains open, though there have been no significant developments. And each year, as November 5th approaches, Kevin repeats the same ritual. He returns to King's Cross Station, walks along the platform where his brother was last seen, and places a small photograph on a bench. Then he sits and watches the rush of passengers, listening for footsteps, searching for a face that can never grow old. Martin Allen disappeared at the age of 15, in a city crowded with cameras, trains, and surveillance. At least 3 people saw him. No one intervened. No one has been held accountable. No one has offered answers. It remains one of the most haunting child disappearance cases in modern British history, not only because of the absence of leads, but because of the persistent fear that it was deliberately buried by people who should have had nothing to hide. 40 years later, the question remains: what happened to Martin Allen? And more disturbingly, who, exactly, doesn't want us to know? Up until that point, Leah Roberts had been searching for something, though even she couldn't clearly define what it was. In 1999, a new life-altering event forced her to stop in her tracks. A serious car accident nearly killed her. Her vehicle was struck with such force that she required a metal rod implanted in her leg and spent weeks in recovery. During this period, she immersed herself even deeper in the philosophy of the Beat Generation, exploring ideas of radical freedom, detachment, and inner discovery. Leah wasn't running from anything specific. She was seeking something abstract and undefined. By early 2000, Leah appeared calmer. She had returned to university, though she had no fixed plan to graduate. She played guitar, adopted a cat, and spent much of her time in cafes and libraries. She lived alone but kept in close contact with her sister, Kara, who lived nearby. To most people, Leah seemed like a free-spirited but stable young woman. But beneath the surface, she was still grappling with a turbulent mix of grief, curiosity, and a longing for something different. On March 9, 2000, Leah spoke briefly with Kara by phone. She mentioned she'd been thinking about taking a trip. She needed clarity. Kara assumed it was just a passing idea. Leah hadn't given any specifics. But the next day, she was gone. Her home was locked. The cat had been left with plenty of food, and her belongings were in order. Mail had not been collected. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Her vehicle, a 1993 white Jeep Cherokee, had also vanished. When Kara noticed Leah hadn't returned calls or shown up for 2 days, she became alarmed. But the police didn't respond immediately. Leah was an adult, independent, with no history of erratic behavior. Technically, she had the right to leave whenever she wished. Several days passed without any word. Then, on March 13, activity appeared on Leah's bank account in North Carolina. She had withdrawn cash from her checking and savings accounts. Her transaction history showed she had purchased travel clothing, camping gear, and several books, including one about the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. That's when investigators realized Leah wasn't running away. She was on a personal mission. In one of her recent journal entries, Leah had written a quote from Jack Kerouac, "And that's why I'm going to the mountain." She had also mentioned feeling drawn to the Pacific Northwest. The place that called to her most strongly was Desolation Peak, a remote mountain where Kerouac had spent 63 days as a fire lookout, writing in solitude. For Leah, the destination held spiritual significance. On March 13, Leah left North Carolina, driving west. The journey to Washington state covered over 4,000 kilometers. In the following days, small traces of her movements emerged: toll booths, ATM withdrawals, gas station receipts. All indicated she was traveling alone. 1 week later, on March 18, Leah's Jeep Cherokee was found. It was located in a wooded area beside a logging road, north of Bellingham, Washington. The vehicle was severely damaged, having crashed into an embankment. At first glance, it looked like an accident, but the scene didn't make sense. The car had been launched down the hill at high speed, yet there were no skid marks to indicate braking. The engine was still running when it struck the vegetation, but the airbag on the driver's side hadn't deployed, suggesting no one was in the seat at the moment of impact. The driver's seat was fully reclined, and the seatbelt showed no signs of recent use. Inside, the mystery only deepened. None of Leah's belongings had been stolen. There was untouched food, a carefully folded blanket, $2,500 in cash, and her passport. Her family ring, an item she always wore, was found nearby. Nothing had been broken. The windows were intact. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. The keys were still in the ignition, and a blanket and pillow had been placed on top of the luggage, as if someone had recently slept there, or wanted to make it seem that Leah had. A few meters from the Jeep, police discovered an open wallet containing Leah's ID and cards, a bottle of water, unopened energy bars, and her guitar. Human footprints were later found deeper in the forest, but there was no way to determine whether they were fresh or even hers. The investigation shifted to Bellingham, the nearest town. There, it was confirmed that Leah had dined at a local restaurant, the Horseshoe Cafe, on the evening of March 13. A server remembered her well, a polite, slightly reserved young woman with a southern accent, traveling alone, who left a generous tip. But then came a troubling claim. Another employee reported that Leah had not left alone. He insisted that she had been seen getting into her Jeep with an unidentified man. With that statement, the case took on an entirely new dimension. The family was informed that Leah may not have journeyed into the mountains by herself. Someone may have followed her, or posed as a helpful companion along the way. And that person may have been involved in what happened next. Police created a partial description of the man. The man was described as being between 30 and 40 years old, with brown hair, a slim build, and casually dressed. However, no record of his identity was ever found. No other witness saw him. There were no working cameras nearby. Just one person's account, with no way to verify it. Leah's siblings flew to Washington to assist in the investigation. Kara, in particular, was deeply unsettled by what they discovered. Her sister had planned the trip with too much intention and forethought to simply vanish without a trace. Leah was not impulsive. The fact that she had left behind money, clothing, food, and even her travel journal, with no farewell note, seemed completely inconsistent with the idea of suicide. The FBI became involved in the investigation. Accident reconstruction experts examined the Jeep and arrived at an even more troubling conclusion. The accelerator pedal had been intentionally jammed with an external object. Someone may have pushed the vehicle down the embankment on purpose, with no one behind the wheel. In other words, the crash had been staged. The impact was simulated. Over the following weeks, investigators combed the surrounding forest with search dogs, helicopters, and drones, but no human remains, clothing, or signs of a campsite were found. Flyers were posted along nearby roads, and locals and travelers were interviewed, yet nothing emerged. It was as if Leah had vanished into thin air after leaving the restaurant. The mystery quickly gained national media attention. Tips poured in from people claiming to have seen Leah in various states, even across the Canadian border, but none of the leads could be verified. The case became even more frustrating when Kara received a voicemail, a silent call lasting only a few seconds. It was traced to a public payphone in Everett, Washington, roughly 150 kilometers from where the Jeep was found. But by the time police arrived, no one was there. The Roberts family kept the search alive for years. They launched a website, shared Leah's story on TV, in forums, and in documentaries. One of the most unsettling clues emerged from a handwritten note found among Leah's belongings. Written just before she left, it read, "I'm driving into a new life. Please don't follow me." It may have been written as part of a personal exercise, but it also sounded like a warning. Kara later explained in interviews that Leah wasn't fleeing from anyone in particular, but rather from a life that no longer made sense to her. She was trying to find herself. That didn't mean she wanted to disappear. If Leah had truly left of her own free will, she would have left some signal, at least to her sister, a note, a call, a clue. But she never did. In 2006, a private investigator hired by the family received an anonymous tip. A woman resembling Leah had been seen living in a rural community across the Canadian border. The investigator interviewed neighbors, some of whom said a woman matching Leah's description, quiet, with a southern accent, had been living on a nearby farm. But when he arrived, the woman was gone. The house stood empty. To this day, the case remains unsolved. Leah's disappearance has never been officially classified as criminal, but the abandoned vehicle, the lack of any trace of life, and the unknown man last seen with her strongly suggest the possibility of a dangerous, possibly fatal, encounter. What continues to baffle investigators is the absence of desperation. No goodbye note, no debt, no illness, no clear indication that she intended to take her own life. Just a sensitive, intelligent young woman, shaped by grief, who set off in search of something and never returned. More than 2 decades after her disappearance, Leah Roberts remains suspended between myth, suspicion, and unanswered grief. Her case has become the subject of forums, podcasts, and documentaries, as entire online communities continue trying to decipher what happened during that fateful journey to the Pacific Northwest. Some believe that Leah did achieve what she set out to do, that she disconnected from the world, assumed a new identity, and began again, perhaps in a rural or artistic community. They argue she was intelligent and resolute enough to do so. Her farewell note, the books she read, the meticulous way she organized her departure, all suggest the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. But that theory always runs into the same question. Why didn't she send even one signal of life, at least to her sister? Others suggest something darker, that Leah never reached her intended destination, and that the unidentified man last seen with her played a far more sinister role. There are unverified reports of other young women disappearing in the same region around the same time, but no direct connection has ever been established. A third theory blends emotion and tragedy, that Leah, in a state of unresolved grief and emotional vulnerability, either fell into the wrong hands or experienced a psychological crisis in an unfamiliar environment. Perhaps she wandered into the forest after leaving the jeep, disoriented, alone, and never returned. But if that were the case, why was no trace of her ever found? Why did no one hear or see anything? And what about the silent call from the public payphone days later? Some even suggest that the jeep was deliberately manipulated, that someone intended to send a message. The absence of footprints or signs of violence wasn't an accident, but evidence of a carefully staged scene, executed by someone calculated and cold, in a silent performance set deep in the woods. For the Roberts family, theories do not change what matters most. Kara, Leah's older sister, has said the same thing every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. It doesn't matter if Leah chose to leave, if she's alive, or if someone hurt her. All we want, is to know the truth. Knowing what happened, that is all her family wants. To this day, Leah Roberts is still listed in the National Missing Persons Database as missing under suspicious circumstances. Her case remains officially open. Her family maintains an active tip line, and every March in Durham, North Carolina, a single flower is placed in front of her old house beside a copy of On the Road by Jack Kerouac, the book that inspired her so deeply. Because some people vanish from the face of the earth without a trace. But others, like Leah, disappear in a way so profound, so haunting, that neither time, silence, nor oblivion can erase their story. The case of Jeremy Bright. How can a 14-year-old boy vanish in the middle of a bustling county fair, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and even his own sister, without a single person seeing anything? When Jeremy Bright was last seen in Douglas County, Oregon, he was simply an excited teenager enjoying his final summer before high school. But what began as an ordinary afternoon at the Coos County Fair in 1986 would become one of the region's most confounding unsolved mysteries. This is the full story of Jeremy Bright's disappearance. Jeremy was born on May 25, 1972, in Myrtle Point, a small rural town in Oregon with fewer than 3,000 residents. It was a quiet place of rolling green hills, modest homes, and a tightly knit community where everyone at least recognized each other. The Bright family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either. Jeremy's mother, Diane, was a single parent who worked multiple jobs to support Jeremy and his younger sister, Stay. The children's father was absent from their lives, but there were no reports of abuse or serious dysfunction. Jeremy was known as a smart, athletic boy who was very close to his mother and sister and had a relatively healthy social life. In recent years, Diane had relocated with her children to Grants Pass, about 2 hours away from Myrtle Point, in search of better work opportunities. But in August of 1986, Jeremy asked to return to his hometown for a brief visit, to spend time with his stepfather and maternal grandmother. The visit happened to coincide with the much-anticipated county fair, a major annual event for the small town, featuring carnival rides, food stalls, races, and contests. For the local teens, it was the highlight of the summer. Jeremy didn't want to miss it. Diane agreed to the plan. Jeremy and his sister Stay would travel from Grants Pass to Myrtle Point on August 11th and stay for the week. Diane would pick them up after the fair, on August 15th. The children settled in at their grandmother's house. Jeremy seemed happy. He was reconnecting with old friends, playing basketball, and enjoying the fair. On August 13th, he attended a routine doctor's appointment to follow up on an old leg injury. Everything checked out. He was healthy. Everything appeared to be going according to plan. August 14, 1986, was the last confirmed sighting of Jeremy Bright. That afternoon, Jeremy and his sister went to the fair, accompanied by friends. At some point, Jeremy separated from the group to meet up with other acquaintances. He was wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and Nike sneakers. He had some cash on him and wore a wristwatch. He was tall for his age, slim, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. He was supposed to meet his stepfather later that day to go swimming, as they had done earlier in the week. But he never showed up. That evening, Stay returned home without Jeremy. She assumed he had stayed with friends or would return later. But Jeremy never came back. By morning, their grandmother was alarmed. It was unlike Jeremy not to check in. She began calling friends and visiting neighbors. When no one knew anything, she contacted Diane, who arrived the next day and immediately reported her son missing to the police. At first, law enforcement didn't respond with urgency. Jeremy was a teenager on summer break. Officers speculated that he might have run off with friends, traveled to another town, or even decided to leave home temporarily. But Diane was adamant. Jeremy had no reason to run away. He left no note, took no extra clothes, and, perhaps most telling, missed a crucial medical appointment that could determine whether he'd be cleared to continue playing basketball. It was unthinkable that he'd skip it of his own accord. Eventually, the police began to take the case more seriously. But by then, valuable time had been lost. The critical early hours had slipped away, and with a bustling fair and no surveillance cameras, the trail had already gone cold. Initial witness reports were chaotic and contradictory. Some said they saw Jeremy at the fair on August 14th near the public restrooms. Others claimed he was with older boys who were possibly drinking. One disturbing account described Jeremy with a head injury, being held by two adult men who appeared to be escorting him by force. Yet that testimony wasn't verified at the time and was never thoroughly followed up. That sighting, of a bleeding teen being led away by two grown men, should have set off immediate alarms. But in the noise and confusion of the fair, it was dismissed or overlooked. Over the following days, multiple people claimed to have seen Jeremy in different parts of the fairgrounds, at the rides, near the stage, walking with older individuals. But the sheer volume of inconsistent reports made it difficult to determine what was real. Then came a chilling discovery. Jeremy's wristwatch and house keys were found neatly placed on a ledge inside one of the fair's public restrooms. It appeared as though someone had deliberately placed them there. There were no traces of blood, no signs of struggle, just the watch and keys, left as if with intent. This discovery reinforced the theory that something had happened to Jeremy inside the fairgrounds. But it also introduced another possibility. Someone may have planted the items to divert attention. The search intensified. Tracking dogs were brought in, along with community volunteers and county officers. Forests, rivers, and abandoned houses were combed through meticulously. The FBI joined the investigation weeks later, once the case began drawing national attention. Yet no trace of Jeremy was found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, and in a town as small as Myrtle Point, where everyone knew each other, that seemed nearly impossible. Unless, of course, someone close to him knew more than they were revealing. That's when rumors began to circulate. Several teenagers who attended the fair claimed that Jeremy had been at a private party that night, hosted by older boys, some with known histories of drug use and violence. One name surfaced repeatedly: Terry Lee Steinhoff, a local young man who had worked at the fair that year and who had once been a friend of the Bright family. At one point, he had even babysat Jeremy. In 1986, Steinhoff was in his early 20s and involved in questionable circles, underground parties, petty theft, and drug use. Multiple witnesses placed him among the last people to see Jeremy alive. But when questioned by police, Steinhoff denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Jeremy that day. Lacking sufficient evidence, authorities had no grounds to arrest him, and the investigation stagnated once again. Months passed, then years. In 1989, Terry Steinhoff was arrested for the brutal murder of a woman in Oregon. He had stabbed her and left her for dead before fleeing. He was apprehended, tried, and convicted. The connection to Jeremy Bright's case gained renewed attention. If Steinhoff was capable of such a violent crime, why wouldn't he have been capable of harming Jeremy years earlier? Police questioned him again while he was incarcerated. He never admitted any involvement in Jeremy's disappearance and was never formally charged. Still, for the Bright family, the coincidence was too glaring to dismiss, especially considering Steinhoff's access to Jeremy, his familiarity with the boy's routines, and his confirmed presence at the fair that week. A much darker rumor suggested that Jeremy had been injured accidentally, perhaps during a fight or fall at that alleged private party, and that those present had panicked, ultimately deciding to hide what had happened. The theory held that his body was secretly buried in the wooded terrain near the river. Those areas were searched, even excavated based on anonymous tips, but no evidence was found. Jeremy's mother, Diane Bright, never stopped searching. She became an activist, relentlessly pressuring authorities and keeping the case alive in the media. On one anniversary, in 2007, an anonymous caller claimed Jeremy's body was buried beneath a specific house. Investigators searched the property with cadaver dogs. Nothing was found. Over the years, there were reported sightings. People who swore they'd seen a boy resembling Jeremy in other states. One report in Idaho seemed promising, but every lead ultimately proved false. In 2011, a new team of county detectives reopened the case, reanalyzing initial statements and attempting to track down all who had attended the 1986 party. Some had died, others refused to speak, many simply claimed to remember nothing. It was as if a shroud of silence still cloaked the events of that night. For Jeremy's sister, Stay, who had been only 10 at the time, the disappearance was a life-altering trauma. She's given interviews, shared memories, and consistently stated that she never believed her brother left willingly. She knew something terrible had happened, but the most agonizing part is not knowing what. To this day, Jeremy Bright remains missing. To this day, Jeremy Bright remains missing. There are no remains, no confessions, no resolution. Only the memory of a tall, smiling 14-year-old who went to the fair with his sister and never returned. More than 3 decades later, his disappearance remains an open wound in Myrtle Point. Not just because of the unexplainable loss of a teenager, but due to the haunting suspicion that someone still knows what happened. and has chosen silence. 3 prevailing theories persist. The accidental death cover-up. Jeremy, curious and youthful, may have attended a party with older teens. He could have been injured, perhaps from alcohol, a fall, or a fight. Fearing the consequences, those present may have hidden the body and maintained silence. This theory aligns with the careful placement of his watch and keys, the delayed police response, and the persistent rumors, but nobody, confession, or definitive evidence has ever been found. The Steinhoff theory, a man with a violent record, a prior connection to Jeremy, and one of the last known individuals to see him. His later conviction for murder made him the prime suspect, even without solid proof. Supporters of this theory argue that Jeremy, trusting Steinhoff, could have gone with him, only to meet a tragic end. The opportunistic crime, a less favored but still considered theory. Jeremy may have been approached while briefly alone, lured away, and killed. But this contradicts the fact that he was surrounded by familiar faces at the fair, and no one recalled seeing him leave the grounds. Rumors continue to this day. Some say Jeremy's body lies on property once owned by a fair worker who moved away shortly after. Others believe he was buried near the Coquille River or disposed of in a sealed well. Each theory has prompted searches, excavations, and renewed heartbreak. None have led to answers. In recent years, new forensic technologies have been employed in the hope of finally bringing closure to the Bright family. Genetic comparisons, unidentified remains databases, facial reconstructions, none have yielded results. Jeremy has not been found, neither alive nor deceased. For his mother, Diane, who passed away in 2012 without ever knowing the truth, the absence was a lifelong sentence. For his sister, Saint, who grew up with that void, the search continues. She believes someone in Myrtle Point knows what happened. That in a town where everyone knows each other, silence cannot last forever. Today, Jeremy Bright's photo still hangs on dusty community boards, on missing persons websites, and in the collective memory of a town that never fully moved on from that summer fair in 1986. Because some cases grow cold with time, others, like this one, remain burning in the hearts of those who cannot, and will not, forget. If this video gave you something to think about, let us know in the comments which of these 3 cases impacted you the most, and why. We'd love to hear from you. Also, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is there. It helps us feel that this community is connected beyond borders. Don't forget to leave a like if you value the research that goes into bringing these stories to life. And subscribe if you haven't already. In this space, stories aren't shortened, they're told in full. See you in the next case.